in the conservative movement. This is a subject for my colleagues, really of a tremendous amount of, I must be honest, angst and pain, right? For rabbis who give their whole lives to the community, to be there for the raising of children, and then have the children come to them wanting them to officiate their marriage, and to say to this person you've loved since they were born, I can't do that. It's a tremendous, tremendous source of pain. But for us, as much as we want a spirit of audacious welcome, extravagant welcome, we believe in the halakha. And we believe also that experience shows that there's something to aspire to about putting as much Judaism in every household as you can, right? Wherever you start, from whatever that starting point is. And I'm going to say something which is my very personal feeling, and it's a subject that's become less popular, and I think we've done ourselves a disservice. And that is that, for me, I feel immeasurably blessed beyond my own measure to be Jewish, right? There's nothing of my merits that means that I should get to carry forward this tradition that has given so much to the world. And it is a greater thing for me to be able to participate in that, not as a rabbi, just as a Jew, as a human being, than anything I feel I could accomplish on my own, because it stands for so much. And so to me, when someone comes to me who is a part of a Jewish community, who is themselves not Jewish, I not only greet them with love, but through that love, I want to share this with them. And I want to share it with them completely. And the desire to be open in our community has made the spirit of wanting to share Judaism completely, to encourage people to consider, at a time and a place, to join us completely, to become Jewish. It's become something that is wrongly less popular to say, because it sounds like you don't love and accept that person. I accept you wherever you are for your whole life. I only want to be able to share this. And I accept if people say, for whatever reason, not now, I can't, I won't, I wouldn't. But I think that one of the things our community has to do is celebrate our Judaism from the most positive sense, and to say each of us is going to try to bring every person to see as much Judaism, to love as much Judaism as we can, and hopefully to be as blessed as we are.
Interesting.
We're a people of law. Halakha is ultimately a legal system. We all believe in the 10 Commandments, not the 10 suggestions. And therefore, in defining who we are, even as we do as an American people, there are boundaries, there are non-negotiables that if we go beyond, we are not what we are. So for the observant or the Orthodox community, what first defines us is what our community is and what the limits of the law are. And often they are very hard. And often they are, as you said, counterintuitive to contemporary norms and values. But also, as Rabbi Schoenfeld said, even as we have to be true to our beliefs and our limits and our definitions of community, we have to be boundless in our relations with others, in our compassion to others, in our generosity of spirit to others, in being as welcoming as our rules of welcome allow us to be. As you said, be prepared to welcome whoever's serious and really wants to be a part of our community into our community.
That's great. And that's actually a perfect lead-in to our next question, which is a question from our own local rabbis to you. And they ask, what do you respect and admire most about your colleagues' movements that you wish was more fully embraced by your own movements?
Well, I mean, listen, I envy the level of education that is present in the lay Orthodox community. Richard always invites me every year to come speak to a group of presidential fellows. I hope this isn't going to get you fired from Yeshiva University.
On the list of things that are going to get me fired, David, this is not on the top.
And one of the things
When Rabbi Schoenfeld and I waltz off the stage, that might be something that will do it.
And one of the things that I notice, I meet with 20, 30 of these young people. They've
Multiple times. They want you back.
multiple times. They've had 13 years of day school education, a year or two studying in yeshivot in Israel, 4 years at Yeshiva College or Stern College. When I teach generally in an Orthodox synagogue, I actually can bring Hebrew texts. Usually the laity knows Hebrew well enough to be able to follow these texts. I mean, I tend to translate it when I do it, but I can tell you most of the people follow it. I envy that. Having said that, and I think as Rabbi Stern indicated when he offered the Devar Torah at the beginning today, I like to think, that we have this more and more within the liberal precincts of Judaism, and much of what I see in the Orthodox movement, I see among elements of the conservative movement as well. And it's that type of commitment to classical Jewish learning that I genuinely admire the most.
Nice. Either of you want to share?
Sure. Well, I certainly admire the fact that the Reform movement has eliminated the second paragraph of Yakum Purkam.
Why don't you explain that for people who may not
No,
have?
I won't explain it. It was a silly joke. Clearly, the...
Shorten the liturgy. We'll leave
That's
it
right,
at
shorten
that.
the liturgy. Clearly, both in the conservative and the Reform world, there has been such a strong tradition of going beyond our own borders to share concern for the well-being of humanity, for remembering what sometimes those of us who are so intense at being Jewish forget, is that we're all created in the image of God, and that we are not the children of Noah who went inside the ark and closed the doors and rode out the storm as civilization was destroyed, but we're the children of Sarah and Abraham, who built a tent with doors open in each direction to reach beyond and care for the entire world. I think that through the work of both of our sister movements who have developed, and often they use the term tikkun olam, they've been so successful that someone once asked me how you say tikkun olam in Hebrew. But I think unfortunately, I used to think that anti-Semitism was over. And it was a foolishness on my part, because Esav sones Yaakov, that Esav hates Jacob, and unfortunately, apparently, we have to live with it. But I do know that it is not the time where most of our children have ever experienced a personal act of anti-Semitism, that obviously non-Jews like us because they're marrying us in record numbers, and that we are at home in this culture, and the notion that we carry with us 2,000 years of persecution, we shouldn't forget about it, but those 2,000 years of exilic existence also robbed us of the basic Jewish covenantal responsibility to bring the language and the love and the life of Torah to all of humankind. The liberal Jewish movements have pioneered that. I know I had the privilege when I was working at Hillel to try to bring that to the college campuses and beyond, and I can tell you that increasingly now in the Orthodox world, the notion that you don't have to sacrifice who you are in order to make a difference to others, but in fact it's an imperative that will make you a stronger you by doing that. And I think that's a great thing that we have and continue to learn from liberal Judaism.
That's great.
From the movements of both of my esteemed colleagues, I think that what I admire is the ability of those movements to really very positively and affirmatively and consistently promote their own success. And one of the challenges of the conservative movement, by being in this place of synthesis, is that we have been for decades, this precedes the 1990 study, somewhat willing to angst in public. And it opens a certain door. And what has happened is that this has really just gone so far. And so the Jewish community is sort of its own undoing in this way on the subject of the conservative movement. We were so symbolic of the heyday of the post-war years that in the aftermath of that, people sort of measure everything by the conservative movement. And as I've come to like to say, the Jewish community that is so anxious is quarantining its anxiety about the Jewish future in the conservative movement. Because it is easier when I look at how hard it is, how much money it takes, and time it takes, and effort it takes to build this incredibly, infinitely precious Jewish life. If I'm afraid that we won't succeed, and we can't have it, that we don't actually have the ability to do it, it's easier to say the conservative movement is in such decline, right? Because then it's quarantined. Then it's only happening to the conservative movement. The fact is that the facts are much different. One of the things we have to look at the Pew study is that by saying non-Orthodox Jews only, and the Pew study took in a tremendous number of people with no affiliation whatsoever, what would happen to the statistics of the Orthodox movement if, as my colleague Alan Silverstein suggested, we put it together with all non-conservative Jews, right? It would then affect those numbers as well, right? So conservative households, fully 1/3 of our households with school-age children are in full-time day schools, fully 1/3. The Avichai study of Jewish leaders in their 20s and 30s of about 5-6 years ago found that over 40% of these leaders came out of non-Orthodox day schools, 40% of Jewish leaders in their 20s and 30s. And when those young adults were in day school, a non-Orthodox day school was a Solomon Schechter school. That's what it was called in those days. So I think that what I admire and want my colleagues to emulate and the conservative movement to emulate is to really defend, right, the success that we're having in the hopes that we can make it bigger, rather than someone says the sky's falling and it's only going to land on conservative Jews, handing that person a microphone.
Right, that's great.
Julie, Janie, let's also understand that we don't represent all the Jews. There is, sadly, there is this huge body that will answer any questionnaire saying they're just Jewish. And that what that means in too many cases is that they're temporarily Jewish. And that whatever our differences, right, what we are tremendously concerned about is, are our children going to be Jewish? We look to find different ways to do it, and we have different struggles in doing it. But at least on this stage, this is at least these two are the leadership of a strong segment of the Jewish people that says, we will, we must, we have to, we should go on. And I think what we really have to be concerned about is those people who don't see an enormous need to try to define ourselves and try to live positively.
And I think I just want to add one thing in terms of the just Jewish piece, because I think there's also more and more people who are passionately Jewish, but aren't interested in a movement and aren't interested in one particular viewpoint that they want to only align with. And so sometimes that just Jewish is that I'm non-denominational or post-denominational or whatever. So I just want to add that in there.
That's good. Of course, the great challenge for them is how they're going to transmit that.
Correct, correct. So I want to end with our last question, and we're going to go full circle. We're going to go full circle in the sense that I would like each of you, as a closing remark, to share with us your favorite midrash. What is it? Something about, teach us something from you that you'd like us to learn from you.
Do you want me to start?
Whomever.
A midrash often associated with the philosophy of the conservative movement is the story of Achnai's oven. And it's a story of an oven, a utensil, that it was not clear if it was contaminated or not contaminated. The very fact that they would be having this discussion at that particular time in Jewish history is a fascinating question for historians. But Rabbi Eliezer was having a debate with the other scholars in the Beit Midrash, and he insisted that it was pure. And the other scholars said, the majority said, no, 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 it's not. And so he said, if so, let the carob tree prove it. And a carob tree gets up and moves 100 cubits and sits down again. And the scholars say, it's none of a carob tree's business to discuss this. The majority says it's not pure. So Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, then let the waters prove it. The waters flow backwards instead of forwards. And the scholars say it's not any business of the water to tell us whether this oven is pure or impure. So then Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, if I'm right, let the walls of this building lean in. And the walls start to lean in. And another scholar representing the majority stands up, Rabbi Yehoshua, and says to the walls, it's none of your business what's going on here. The majority says it's not pure. And the walls sort of stood hovering in the middle, neither collapsing nor not collapsing. And then Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, then let a bat kol, let a divine voice come forward and defend me. And a bat kol comes and says, don't you know that the halacha is always according to Rabbi Eliezer? And Rabbi Yehoshua says to the divine voice, what business is it of yours? It's written in the Torah. Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in heaven, but it's here. It is up to us to make this decision. And the Midrash ends with an image of Rabbi Natan finding the prophet Elijah on the road and talking to Elijah about this story. And Elijah says that what the Holy One said at that point, what the Holy One did was to laugh and to say, my children, they have defeated me. And perhaps that ties in to what we were saying about Lord Rabbi Sachs' question. Right? In every generation, we are not moving apart to rediscover it. This is our task. This is the task that God gave us, to find these answers and struggle with them for ourselves.
Beautiful, beautiful.
That's cool. Very nice. You want to go next?
Who wants the last word?
Rabbi Ellenson, who's by far our senior. And also
love
doesn't struggle
President
this way. He's
Joel.
retired. He gets to do whatever he wants. So it's before Pesach. So my favorite, it's hard to say my favorite. One of my favorites, I think, comes from the Mechilta de Rebbe Eliezer. You know the great story of the Exodus from Egypt, and you know how Charlton Heston took the Jews out of Egypt, brought them to the Red Sea, whereupon Yul Brynner and thousands of extras came from Egypt to trap the children of Israel, and in front of them, of course, was the Red Sea transplanted on MGM's studio lot, and
I think that's how it happened.
and the children of Israel yelled to Moses and said, "Why'd you bring us here? We're going to die. We're going to be consumed here," and Charlton Heston said, "Fear not, stand back and see the glory of the Lord. Hashem yilachem lachem, God will fight for you." At that moment, he turns to God, and God, in one of the great double takes of history, says, "Ma titzak elai? Why are you screaming to me?" In other words, what do you want from my life? We're told then by the Midrash that a Jew named Nachshon ben Aminadab looked at the scene and said, "I guess it's time for me to do something." And he leapt into the sea. And as he leapt into the sea, God says, "You got it," and parts the sea. Now, by the way, we have a tradition, we call that the leap of faith, right? But in point of fact, the message there is that as we've been taken out of the house of bondage, we're not supposed to sit back and say, okay, God, run our lives. That what freedom means is the ability to take responsibility. And to take responsibility and say, we're going to move forward, confident that God will move with us. We will accept our sacred story, our Torah. We will learn it. We will go to our promised land, and we will be weaned from that type of dependence on God and the type of dependence on God that comes from studying God's Torah and living our lives in a certain way. It's my favorite medrash. Okay, big shot.
I'm sitting here thinking, as we're going through, I'm going to, one just very, very brief, and then my favorite really of all, and I thought about this particularly during the years that I served as president of the College Institute. And I probably learned it when I was 6 or 7 years old. Not a complicated one, but the question of why was Moses chosen to be the leader of the Jewish people, that of course he was a shepherd for his flock, and that there was a little sheep who escaped, and the sheep was helpless and unable to get back to the rest of the flock. And Moses went, discovered that sheep, wouldn't let a single sheep escape, put the sheep over his shoulders and brought him back to the flock. And according to the Midrash, this is why God chose Moses to lead the people, because of his concern for each and every soul that he would shepherd. And then the text that goes along with that for me, in the 1860s, this really is my favorite Jewish text. There was a rabbi in New Orleans named Bernard Illoway, and this will be hard to believe that Jews would see this as an issue. I know you've never heard of this today. There was intermarriage in New Orleans in the 1860s. And there were children born to non-Jewish mothers and Jewish fathers. Rabbi Illoway, who was the rabbi of the community, told the mohel of the community, you cannot perform ritual circumcision on these boys because they're not going to be raised in observant Jewish homes. I always loved this, of course, in the war between the states, when hundreds of thousands of people are killed, Jews know what really is most important. Are you going to perform a brit on a little baby or not? Rabbi Illoway wrote a letter to a number of rabbis in Europe asking their opinion. All of them basically supported Rabbi Illoway's position. By the way, there was a Mr. Goldenberg in the community who was also a moil, and he just said, in effect, pay me the fee. I don't really care what Rabbi Illoway says. That's what it is to live in a non-coercive political society. But there's a rabbi named Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer who lived from 1795 to 1874. And Rabbi Kalischer answered this question and said, not only are you permitted to circumcise this child, it's a mitzvah. It's actually a commandment to circumcise these children and perform an enabling act. He's an Orthodox rabbi, a great leader of early Zionism, Rabbi Kalischer, because the position that he took was that, of course, this is an enabling act, and later on the child can be immersed in a mikveh and converted to Judaism. But there are two lines of his that I will say I always try to keep in mind every day that I teach and with every person I meet. First, he says about the children. He said, yes, he said, circumcise them. Bring them, do whatever you can to bring them in the community. Mi yodea, who knows, ulai yitzmachu mehen gedolei Yisrael. How do you know? Some great leader of the Jewish people may spring from among these children. And I think about that line, which is an halachic text, but it's really midrashic, I would say. But the reason why I think it's important is, what would it mean if every person you met, where you knew that they had a nitzotz, a spark of God's holiness in them, what is it that you can do to bring that spark out and take it from being nistar, hidden, to being galui, to being revealed in the world? When I teach, and I have people like Nancy Kasten and David Stern in my class, I think of that text. Because how is it that you know what it is that they're going to do one day among the Jewish people and in the larger world. And then finally, about the fathers, he calls them posheim. From his standpoint as a traditional rabbi, by intermarrying, they are, in quotes, sinners. But he says, you know what, here, what the fathers want to do, it's good. And lifamim afilu poshei Yisrael osim mitzvot karimon. Sometimes even people who do bad things can perform the greatest good deeds in the world that are as plentiful as the seeds in a pomegranate. So what's the task of a teacher or of a rabbi? It's liskotat harabim. How is it you give zikui harabim? How is it you give merit to people? And what these midrashim and these lines teach me, in some measure, is to understand the potential of every person that you encounter, whoever it is you're going to be teaching, these rabbis that Rabbi Schoenfeld began with, and educators that Richard strives to create. How is it you know what it is that your students are one day going to do and how they're going to transform lives? And to understand that the nature of what it is to be human, and this I think is the greatest miracle of Jewish faith, is that God sees us in all our weaknesses, in all our flaws, and nevertheless believes that we are significant enough to be God's covenantal partners in helping to repair the world. And that's why even the worst sinner at a given moment is capable of doing these sorts of good deeds. And that, it seems to me, is what this center is about, and it's why we certainly celebrate the Mankoffs tonight.
Wow. Well, there's no better ending than that. Thank you very much, and thank you all really for sharing so much of yourselves with us. Thank you.
What an incredible and inspiring testimony to Jewish education. We truly hope that each of you enjoyed tonight's program. Please join us at these upcoming Federation events. We especially want to remind you that our 7th annual Learning Fest is this Sunday, March 23rd, at the Ann and Nate Levine Academy from 9 to 5, with nearly 100 sessions in 9 different tracks. It's going to be an incredible day, and we hope that you will join us. Again, our heartfelt thanks to Joy and Ron for all that you do, and to Rabbi Ellenson, Richard Joel, and Rabbi Schoenfeld. We are honored that you came to Dallas, and we hope that you will remember this night and our Dallas Jewish community. Thank you again for coming tonight and supporting Jewish education in Dallas.